Steve Cropper watched Wilson Pickett dance in a room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis on the evening of May 12, 1965. Pickett was not performing, he was showing Cropper something. The specific place in the beat where the body wanted to land. He did it twice. He did it a third time, slower, so Cropper could see exactly where the weight dropped. What Cropper heard in that movement became "In the Midnight Hour." What Wilson Pickett heard in Cropper hearing it became the rest of his career. Nathaniel Price was 24 years old and had been working as a studio runner at Stax Records in Memphis for 14 months. The person who answered the phone when the phone needed answering, who carried equipment from the loading bay to the tracking floor and returned it when the session was done. He had grown up 3 blocks from a studio in South Memphis, which was how he had gotten the job, had known one of the engineers since childhood, and had presented himself at the right moment. He was learning the studio from the bottom, which is the only place it can be learned from. He understood what the work required before he fully understood how the work was done, and that order of understanding turned out to be the correct one. He had been sent to the Lorraine Motel on the evening of May 12th to deliver a reel of tape to Steve Cropper, who had requested it without explaining why. Nathaniel had the reel and the address. He knocked on the door. Cropper answered. The room behind him contained Wilson Pickett. The session that brought Wilson Pickett to Memphis in May of 1965 had been arranged by Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records, the producer who had shaped American soul music in the 1960s by understanding that the best recordings came from putting musicians where they needed to be and letting them sound like where they came from. Atlantic had signed Pickett in 1963. The New York sessions had been competent and had not produced what Wexler believed Pickett was capable of. He sent him to Memphis, which meant Stax Records, which meant the Stax house musicians, the rhythm section and the songwriters, and the specific acoustic character of a studio that had been making records since 1959 and that had developed in those years a sound that was the opposite of polished, raw, direct, the room present in the recording in a way that New York studios were not. Wexler assigned Cropper to work with Pickett. This was the assignment. It did not come with a song list. Wilson Pickett arrived in Memphis as if he had been arriving in rooms his entire life and had learned to do it in a way the room could not ignore. He was 24 years old and had the physical presence of someone accustomed to filling stages, and the specific intensity of a performer who does not have a lower setting, who brings to every interaction the same concentrated energy that he brought to the stage, because for him, the distinction between on and off had not been established. The Stax musicians were accustomed to working with artists. They were not accustomed to Wilson Pickett. The first day in the studio was the process of discovering what that meant. Wilson Pickett was born on March 18, 1941, in Prattville, Alabama, a small town south of Montgomery, in the heart of the Black Belt, where the soil was dark and the work was cotton, and the church was the organizing institution of black community life. He was the 4th of 11 children of his parents, who sent him at 14 to live with his father in Detroit after the Alabama household could no longer support the size of the family it contained. Detroit in the mid-1950s was the city of Motown before Motown had a name. A city of black industrial workers and church communities, and a music scene developing in clubs and churches simultaneously. The sacred and the secular running parallel tracks that crossed at every intersection. He sang in the church. He sang with a Detroit gospel group called the Violinaires, one of the groups that performed the circuit of black churches in Michigan and Ohio in the late 1950s, where a voice like Pickett's was received the way voices like his were always received, with the specific attention of a congregation that knows the difference between technique and transmission. He moved to secular music because the secular music was asking for what he had. He joined a group called the Falcons in the early 1960s, sang lead on I Found a Love in 1962, a recording that demonstrated to everyone who needed demonstrating that the voice could strip away everything between the lyric and the listener and deliver what remained directly, without protection. It was a voice that did not perform emotion, it reported it. Cropper had developed the habit of taking the writing work out of the studio. The studio was for recording. Writing happened in the places where writing could happen without the studio's schedule imposing on it. The Lorraine Motel on Mulberry Street in Memphis was one of those places, a 2-story brick motor hotel that catered to black travelers and performers, and that had become, in the years since Stax established itself nearby, an informal extension of the studio, the place where musicians stayed and where the work continued after the formal session ended. Nathaniel knocked on the door. Cropper answered. Pickett was sitting on the bed with a notepad. He looked up when the door opened. Nathaniel said he had the tape reel. Cropper took it. He did not immediately send the runner away. He was in the middle of a conversation about a chord progression and told Nathaniel to set the reel down and stay if he wanted. Nathaniel set the reel down and stayed. What he witnessed in the next 2 hours was the kind of thing that studio runners are occasionally present for, and that they spend the rest of their lives describing to people who were not there and who will never fully understand what it was like to be in the room. Pickett was not satisfied with the rhythmic feel of what they had been working on in the studio that afternoon. He was trying to explain what he wanted, and the explanation was not yet in words, was in his body rather than his vocabulary, which is where rhythm lives before language finds it. He stood up from the bed and showed Cropper what he meant. He danced a few bars, not the full choreography of a stage performance, but the essential movement, the specific emphasis that showed where the beat should land. He demonstrated the upbeat, the place in the rhythm where the tension builds before the downbeat releases it, the place where the body leans forward before it lands. Cropper watched. He picked up his guitar from the chair beside the bed. He placed the chord on the upbeat, put the emphasis where Pickett's body had placed it. Pickett heard it and did not move for a moment. Then he nodded once. The word right was in the nod without being spoken. Cropper played it again. Pickett began singing over it, not the finished lyric, not the complete song, but the shape of the thing, the rhythm of words against the rhythm of the upbeat chord. They worked through it slowly, Pickett singing phrases and Cropper finding where the guitar needed to be and where it needed to stay out of the way. Nathaniel stood against the wall near the door and said nothing. He understood that the correct behavior in this room at this moment was invisibility, which was the runner's essential skill, presence without intrusion. He watched Pickett demonstrate the movement again when the conversation stalled, the same clear physical showing of where the weight dropped, and he watched Cropper take that information and put it back into the guitar, and he watched Pickett receive it and the process continue until the thing had taken its shape. They recorded it the following afternoon at Stax. The rhythm section assembled, and Cropper took them through the structure, the upbeat emphasis, the specific rhythmic feel that Pickett's body had defined the previous evening. Pickett stood at the microphone and sang "In the Midnight Hour," as if it had been finished for years, as if it had always existed, and the session was simply the act of making it audible. The horns filled in around the vocal. The rhythm section locked into the upbeat the way the Stax rhythm section locked into things, completely, each part finding its right relationship to the whole, without anyone explaining what that relationship was. Nathaniel was at the studio that afternoon in his usual capacity. He watched the session from the control room. He had been in the room where the song was found. He understood, watching it recorded, The distance between what had happened at the Lorraine Motel the previous evening and what was being captured on tape. The distance between the raw material of a rhythm demonstrated by a man's body and the finished version of that rhythm executed by a room full of musicians at the peak of what they could collectively do. Both things had been necessary. Neither would have produced what the other produced without the other. He worked at Stax for another 6 years, through the end of the label's original operation. He became an engineer. He worked on sessions that produced records people heard and records they did not. He told the story of the Lorraine Motel sometimes, when a session was going slowly and the musicians in it needed something that was not a technical note. He told them about Pickett demonstrating the rhythm with his body in a motel room, about Cropper hearing it and putting it into the guitar, about the moment Pickett nodded. He said, "The song was in Pickett's body before it was in anyone's instrument. Cropper's job was to hear it well enough to find where it belonged. That is what the best collaborations are. One person who has the thing, and one person who knows how to listen to it." In the Midnight Hour reached #1 on the Rhythm and Blues chart in August of 1965. Wilson Pickett recorded Mustang Sally and Land of 1,000 Dances the following year. He became known as the Wicked Pickett, not for anything cruel, but for the specific intensity of a performer who never gave a room less than everything, whose presence was so complete that rooms remembered it long after he had left them. He died on January 19, 2006, in Reston, Virginia. He was 64 years old. The Lorraine Motel on Mulberry Street in Memphis is now the National Civil Rights Museum, built around the rooms and the balcony where, on April 4, 1968, 3 years after Wilson Pickett and Steve Cropper sat across from each other with a guitar and a notepad, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed. The motel that held the song holds the memory. Neither has left. Nathaniel never forgot what he saw in that room. He never forgot the nod, the single, complete acknowledgement of a man who has just heard his own rhythm given back to him in the correct form. The moment when the thing inside the body becomes the thing in the room. Not the record, the nod. Subscribe to Untold Soul Legends. Every week, we find the moments behind the music that changed everything. The comment section is open. Tell us which Soul Legends story you want to hear next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.